From the University of Maryland, this is Policy Watch with Doug Besheroff. As global trade barriers continue to fall, it's clear that globalization is not just a passing trend. In the last decade, India and China in particular have experienced an explosion of wealth and a burgeoning middle class, which some critics believe is created at the expense of American jobs. What are the implications of globalization for the U.S.? Are Americans well positioned to succeed in an increasingly competitive global economy? And will free markets lead to a more peaceful world? To find out, Policy Watch is joined this week by Thomas Friedman, Pulitzer Prize winning New York Times columnist and author of The World is Flat, A Brief History of the 21st Century. And now, the host of Policy Watch, Doug Besheroff.
Tom Friedman. Welcome to Policy Watch and the University of Maryland.
Great to be here. It's great to do a neighborhood concert.
Here, here. Your most recent book is called The World is Flat, and it's a follow-up on your book, The Lexus and the Olive Tree. Well, we're used to thinking of flat earthers as people who want to return to the past, but that's not what you have in mind. You want us to look forward. Tell us what you mean by the world is flat.
Well, what I mean, Doug, is that over the decade of the 1990s, a set of technologies, political events, and new companies emerged and converged willy-nilly, without anyone planning it, to create what I call a web-enabled global platform for multiple forms of sharing knowledge and work, irrespective of time, distance, geography, and increasingly even language. And what I do in The World is Flat is, first of all, explain how I discovered that, the kind of accidental way I discovered it, and then explain how that platform willy-nilly emerged. Because that platform for multiple forms of sharing knowledge and work is such that more people from more places, in more ways, on more days, can plug and play with that platform than ever before in the history of the world. And it's in that sense that I mean the world is flat.
You discovered the world is flat when?
Well, I discovered it quite accidentally. As readers of my column know, beginning in 1995, I took over the foreign affairs columns for the Time, and I really oscillated between kind of Lexus issues and olive tree issues, between issues about trade, finance, and technology, and issues about traditional geopolitics, ethnic conflict, and the like. And I kind of dropped that whole Lexus side of my interest after 9/11 and really went off and covered the 9/11 wars. And I started also doing documentaries for the Discovery Channel and Discovery Times. And we did one on the roots of 9/11. We did one on the a wall Israel had built in the West Bank. And last January of 2004, we were sitting around thinking about what to do our next documentary on. And at the time, the issue of America standing in the world, why they hate us, was very popular. And so I had this idea that maybe we should why don't we go to call centers all over the world and interview young people who spend their days imitating Americans on what they think of America. And I thought it'd make an interesting kind of double image.
These are call centers for if you have a problem with your computer or if you're making a reservation.
Right. Any of them. And they're spread all over the world. So we were literally budgeting out that documentary when a certain Democratic presidential hopeful named John Kerry came out with his blast against Benedict Arnold executives who outsource. So I said, well, why don't we just go to Bangalore? This has become such a hot issue now. We'll go to the Silicon Valley of India, and let's call it the other side of outsourcing. Let's look at this phenomena from the ground up. So in February 15th of 2004, I set off with a crew from the Discovery Channel to look at the other side of outsourcing. And basically, somewhere between the interview with the Indian entrepreneur who wanted to do my taxes from Bangalore and the one who wanted to write my software from Bangalore and the one who wanted to read my x-rays from Bangalore and the one who wanted to trace my lost luggage on Delta Airlines from Bangalore.
Give me his telephone number.
Right. Somewhere between all of that, I realized that while I had been sleeping, while I'd been off covering the 9/11 wars, something really big had happened in this globalization story, and I had missed it. And I wish I could actually, Doug, show you the outtakes of these interviews. Because I'd be sitting there with Jerry Rao, only, the camera would be on him, and I'd be saying, and Jerry would be saying, I'd like to do your taxes from Bongo. He'd literally be soliciting me. And I would say to him when the cameras went off, Jerry, what happened? I missed something. I don't understand how you can do this. I don't understand the technology of it. I don't understand the model. I missed something. What did I miss? And it was really in an effort to answer that question, what did I miss, that I wrote this book.
And it is partly that when we email down the street or to a neighbor, that's the same process as emailing to India or China or anywhere else in the world, and the same cost.
Well, one of the things I missed, of course, and the second chapter of the book is called The 10 Days That Flattened the World. It's about the 10 forces, events, and technologies and companies that came together to create this platform that I talk about for multiple forms of sharing knowledge and work. And one of the things I missed, of course, was the impact of basically two real technological breakthroughs. One was Netscape and the Netscape revolution. And the impact it had, first of all, in bringing the Internet alive. Netscape gave us the Internet browser, and that's what really brought the Internet alive, so grandma and grandpa, grandson and granddaughter could all use it with equal facility. And Netscape also helped actually make the Internet more interconnected for some technical reasons, which I won't go into here.
I should interrupt. It has only been a few years, but Netscape now is yesterday's story, right? It's now Outlook Explorer. It's the Microsoft Explorer.
Right. Well, Netscape also did a third, though very important thing that had less to do with its own technology. Netscape, the Netscape IPO, Netscape going public, triggered the dot-com boom. And Netscape went public on 8/9/95, on August 9th, 1995. And it opened that day, it was priced that day at $28. Stock opened at 71, closed the first day at 56. And we all looked at that and said, whoa, there is gold over them there hills. And therefore, everyone said, let's invest. And we all invested in companies like Global Crossing and Lucent and Nortel. And
there are many unhappy people in this room as you say those words.
There are many unhappy people in this room, but there are many, many happy people in rooms in India and China. Because what those companies did was invest $1 trillion in fiber optic cable in 5 years. And when they did, without anyone planning it, without anyone knowing it, they accidentally made Chennai and College Park, Maryland, next-door neighbors. Right. Because that overinvestment in fiber optic cable drove down the cost of transmitting words and music and data and all that stuff locked away in those websites to basically zero. And always remember, with fiber optic cable, once you put it under the sea and under the land, oh, Doug, it's the gift that keeps on giving. Okay? Because all you have to do is change the switches at each end and keep improving what you can pass down that fiber, and you just get more and more and more capacity out of the same fiber.
Now you mentioned 8/9/95, which was the Netscape offering and the opening of vast rows of dollars. But you also write about something that happened before, and that is, of course, the fall of the Berlin Wall, 11/9/89. Seems so long ago. In some respects, that wasn't just the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was the collapse of the idea that there was an alternative to market economies, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, 11/9, in a wonderful Kabbalistic accident of dates, the Berlin Wall came down on 11/9. November 9th, 1989. And the fall of the Berlin Wall was a huge flattener. It's another one of my 10 flatteners, because what the fall of the wall really allowed was us to think about and look at the world as a single flat plane. Now, I bet if we look back in the archives of the University of Maryland and the kind of discussions you had here on campus before November 9th, 1989, before 11/9, I bet, Doug, we'd rarely find the word globalization being used. We'd see a lot of discussions here about Eastern policy and Western policy, about the North and the South. Mm-hmm. But no one was talking about globalization for a very simple reason. There was a wall in the way.
Right.
Well, the fall of the wall allowed us to think about and conceive of the world as a single flat place. Now, actually, this first flattener I call when the walls came down and the windows came up. Because the Windows operating system 3.0, the breakthrough system, shipped 6 months after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the combination of the wall going down and then the birth of a Windows operating system that gave us kind of a global, universal graphical user interface to actually look at the world through. The fact that those two things happened together, well, that was a huge perceptual flattener about how we thought about the world.
You said that the falling of the wall let us see the world as flat, but I do want to return to what I said. I was struck in the passages of your book about the willingness of people to go out, invest, try to make money. It sounded like a very entrepreneurial world. This was happening in India, which for many decades after its independence had taken a majorly, if not a socialist, at least a very controlled economy. All that passed in the same period, didn't it?
Well, exactly. I mean, basically, coincidental with the creation of this global web-enabled playing field, we saw the opening of India, China, and the former Soviet Empire. India in 1991 basically abandoned 40 years of socialist economics, planned economy, and the Hindu rate of growth, which they thought was about 3%.
That's what they called it, the Hindu rate of growth.
That's what they called it, yeah. And basically decided to adopt a globalization strategy. Same with China. Same with the former Soviet Empire, which collapsed. It wasn't so much a choice. So basically, by coincidence, we created a global platform for more people to share knowledge and work, to plug and play, compete and collaborate than ever before. And what happened to coincide with it? 3 billion people who were out of the game suddenly walk onto the playing field. And when do they arrive? Just when they can compete and collaborate more directly with kids at the University of Maryland or mine or yours than ever before. And this changes many things. As Bill Gates pointed out to me in the book, 35 years ago, if you had the choice of being born a B student at the University of Maryland or a genius at the University of Mumbai, there was no choice, Doug. You wanted to be born a B student in Maryland because your life choices and opportunities would be so much greater as a B student at Maryland than a genius at Mumbai trapped in that socialist Indian economy that you talked about. But when the world is flat, you do not want to be a B student at Maryland because all the geniuses...
Well, wait a minute. We don't want to go quite that far. Thank you.
All the geniuses in Mumbai can now plug and play, compete and collaborate more directly than ever before. They're no longer trapped, rotting like vegetables on the dock in terms of their skills. They can now plug and play, and that changes everything.
And Taiwan, in another way, is one of those places. I met a young woman whose family had immigrated here something like 30 years ago. And for the greater part of that period, they were the wealthy ones, the ones who had come here.
Right.
Now, the family that stayed over there is many times more wealthy.
Well, that's what happens. See, when the world goes flat, actually a couple things happen. But one of the most important is that you can innovate without having to emigrate. Oh, if I can innovate without having to emigrate, I can wear sari, eat curry, live with my extended family. What do I want to freeze my behind off at the University of Maryland for? Come to a strange culture where they have Pizza Huts and KFC chicken. I can innovate without having to emigrate. And that really changes the whole equation. We're just at the beginning of that, but that's going to be a very, very important trend.
Now, interestingly, these are countries, Taiwan's a rock in the middle of the water. I don't think India has tremendous natural resources to export. China used to have a little bit of oil, but not tremendously so. And yet they're ahead. We'll talk a little bit about Russia in a minute, but it doesn't seem as if one needs natural or physical resources the way one once did.
What is Taiwan? It's a barren rock in a typhoon-laden sea. And today it has the third or fourth largest financial reserves in the world. So it is not cursed with oil, as so many other countries. So it developed the ability to dig inside itself. Now, there's a company in America that also manifests a very high coefficient of flatness, and it's called Walmart. Now, think about it. People wonder why Walmart is the way Walmart is, and I profile Walmart in the book. I spent time down in Bentonville, Arkansas at Walmart, and you really have to go to Bentonville to understand Walmart, because Bentonville is the end of the world. We are talking about Lil Abner country. We're talking about the Beverly Hillbillies, okay?
Thank God he's not saying the University of Maryland right there.
Right, okay. So how was it that the Beverly Hillbillies, Jed Clampett, old Sam Walton, didn't discover oil, but actually discovered a perpetual source of finance and profit, and that was Walmart. And it's precisely because there they were in Bentonville, Arkansas, and they had to develop a supply chain that could connect Bentonville, Arkansas, and all these stores in the world. They out-innovated all their competitors because they were so flat in the middle of nowhere. They were the first to use computers, the first to use wireless, the first to use RFID technology. They out-innovated everybody. Yeah, Lil Abner beat the pants off everybody.
I want to talk for a few minutes about the losers in this battle, or the potential losers, not the domestic companies, because we know a little bit about those. I think you call it the great sorting out.
Right.
Now, there are some countries, there are some parts of the globe so far that are left behind, half of Africa, all of Africa, right, but much of Latin America and the rural areas, even of India and China.
Country.
What happens there? Do they catch up?
Well, that's going to be the challenge. That's going to be a challenge for the world. It's going to be a challenge for their own governments and our own government. We have parts of America that aren't flat. The way I look at the world, there are sort of four, challenges to the flattening process. And I have a chapter in the book called The Unflat World, in which I say, don't worry, I know the world isn't flat. And it's not inevitable, it will get flat. So, there are four sort of broad communities that aren't in this world. The first, what I call the too sick. Those are the communities in the grip of HIV/AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis. We're talking about large parts of Africa.
In fact, malaria is much more rampant now than 30 years ago.
Exactly. People the resistance to these drugs is now building up. And so these communities are not flat at all. They cannot plug into this platform and really collaborate. Second group are what I call the two unabled. And that's rural India, rural China, parts of rural America, rural Europe. These are the half-flat. They've been to Bangalore. They've been to Chennai. They've been to the city. They've seen what it can produce, but they don't have the tool. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the educational tools. And it's the big challenge is to bring them into this process. The third group, and we'll talk about that more later, are what I call the too frustrated. And that is a large parts of the Arab Muslim world. They're also half-flat. They've seen the opportunities, they've seen the potential for growth, but they've fallen so far behind, and that builds an enormous amount of frustration, and we see this documented in the Arab Human Development Reports. The last challenge to flatism is too many Toyotas. Because when the world is flat, if you want to know why gas is $2.50 a gallon, it's because the world is flat. When the world is flat, and suddenly 3 billion people who are out of the game walk onto the playing field.
And start buying gas.
Right, and all with their own version of the American dream, a house, a car, a toaster, a Toyota, a microwave. Well, if we don't find an alternative source of energy, we are going to heat up this planet faster than any time in the history of the world. And more importantly, we're going to find ourselves in a global competition with China for oil. So China's foreign policy today is very simple. It can be summarized in one sentence: Taiwan and looking for oil. That's all China is doing.
There's one passage in your book where you start chanting, Ricardo, 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 because this globalization may be great for the very poor people in India, and we'll get back to that in a second. But as you mentioned about John Kerry, it threatens the jobs of many Americans.
Of some Americans. Now, I'm not sure I say many, but some.
And what do we do about those Americans who lose those jobs? Call center people,
sure.
People working in the people who used to prepare those 400,000 income tax returns that are now prepared in India.
Well, this is the history of capitalism. There was never a time when we didn't have this challenge. And so, socialism is a wonderful system for making people equally poor. That there's no better system in history that's been invented for making people equally poor than socialism. Capitalism makes people unequally rich. And part of the reasons for that inequality are this process of creative destruction. Now, the first thing, I'd say to what do we do about it is, first of all, we have to worry about it. Okay, that's a real public policy question. When you're unemployed, the unemployment rate is not 5.2%. It's 100%. Okay. And so, first of all, we have to take this problem seriously. Part of taking it seriously, Doug, is also the understanding what is the problem. 90% of jobs, are not outsourced to India. 95% of jobs are outsourced, as my friend David Rothkopf said. They're outsourced to the past. I just spent 3 hours this morning on C-SPAN. Sat there in a studio, C-SPAN studio, and there was a interviewer sitting across from me. We had 2 cameras working, only unlike here at the University of Maryland, the cameras were robots. They had no cameramen or women, okay? Those jobs were outsourced.
You hear that, fellas?
Yeah, okay. Those jobs have been outsourced to the past. When was the last time you bought an airline ticket? It was more likely from an e-ticket machine than from a physical person. Most jobs get outsourced to the past. So let's understand what the problem is. If anyone thinks that stopping outsourcing to India is going to bring the cameraman job back, they're really, really fooling themselves. And so what I outline in the book is my own philosophy. I call it compassionate flatism. And it's my philosophy of what I think we need in terms of public policy, in terms of health care, affordability of pension, wage insurance, different kind of political leadership, leaders who will explain the world to us, not make us stupid, okay, and different kind of parenting. We're now blending with 2 cultures with a deep and long ethic and tradition of emphasizing education. If we think we can just go on doing the things we did the way we've been doing them the last 50 years and not pay the price for that, we're really fooling ourselves. And that's why I've said over and over again, when I was growing up in Minneapolis, my parents said to me, Tom, finish your dinner, people in China and India are starving. And I say to my girls, finish your homework, because people in China and India are starving for your jobs. And in a flat world, they can have them.
And especially if, as you wrote, let me read this so that I don't get in trouble, that Americans have become a little fat, a little lazy, and a little dumb.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that, as my friend David Rothkopf says in the book, there's one entitlement we really need to get rid of, and that is our sense of entitlement. Because if you think there's anything called an American job in the flat world, you're nuts. There is no such thing. And so, Mom, Dad, throw away the Game Boy, shut off the stupid television, except this show, and C-SPAN earlier this morning, and get back to work.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way.
Yeah. And indeed, before closing, to take this to a more somber note, the same things that unite the world, make it flat, put us at greater risk. September 11th, 2001 was in part about a flat Earth.
No question.
And our interconnectedness just makes our economy additionally fragile to these kinds of interventions. You talk about that the flat Earth is dependent on trust and safety.
Well, the flat world is a friend of IBM, and it's a friend of Al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden understood global supply chains almost as well as Sam Walton. Always remember about the terrorists, they're early adopters. They're always early adopters. And if we aren't as early adopters of the very technology, they can't make the technology, but they can use it.
And they were using email and
everything. We're in Iraq. We're up against a suicide open source supply chain. Okay? You know, the motto at Walmart, you take an item off the shelf in College Park, Maryland, in a Walmart, and another is immediately made in Shenzhen, China. Well, now you deploy a suicide bomber in Baghdad, and another is immediately recruited in Riyadh. It's nothing more than a flat world suicide supply chain.
Well, on that note.
Okay, that was somber.
That was somber. Tom Friedman, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
This program was produced by the University of Maryland, which is solely responsible for its content. The Norman and Florence Brody Family Foundation is dedicated to exploring topics of national and international importance and is proud to support Policy Watch with Doug Besheroff at the University of Maryland.
We are PBS.